Hello and welcome back to the Notcast. It is Sunday, 8th of January 2023. It is episode 262, I think. And today I'm going to be talking about the 8th album released by the Manic Street Preachers, Send Away the Tigers, solo records, lots and lots of singles, and what was generally going on in the world of that band at that time and my relationship to them. This is, let's think now, eighth album. What happens when you've been going for 20 years and you've released 8 studio albums? Do you run out of things to sing about? Do you run out of things to do? Do you start to see music as a job, or is it still a vocation and a passion? And the simple answer to that is, I don't really know, having never been in that situation. From my perspective, creativity is something which I don't think you can necessarily force. Some people can, but for other people, it absolutely can't be. It's just a thing that happens, and then you suddenly have the songs, or you don't have the songs. And what we do have is solo albums by 2 members of the band, as well as an 8th studio album in this period. The band did say they were going to not play any shows for a couple of years, which was broadly correct. But they broke cover of a form with the announcement of James Dean Bradfield's first solo releases, which was a single, That's No Way to Tell a Lie, and an album, The Great Western, which are here. And the single, That's No Way to Tell a Lie, was released early 2006 or thereabouts. I saw 2 shows, that tour, both the ones in London. James went out and did 3 solo legs, starting off with, I think he was going to play Camden Barfly, which I could have got tickets for, but we were seeing Take That night, and then saw him at the University of London Union, ULU, and then later on, I think what was his then final solo show at Camden's Coco, also known as the Camden Palace, in around about October 2006. And this is a strange period, because I am, as you've already gathered by the amount of stuff that I've bought over the years, fiercely loyal to the bands that I love. I still buy the stuff, even if sometimes the stuff doesn't quite hit me in the way in which it doesn't quite work for me the way it used to work for me. But I still believe this. It's almost like a marriage to a band, being a fan sometimes, and you kind of go, still a bit of them that looks like the band that I fell in love with way back when. It's very often, very rare that I will get a divorce from a band, although that has happened. There are points where I've just gone, no, not giving up. The first part of starting to, I think, give up on a band is not going to see them live if they play live. And then the second part is not buying the records. And the third part is kind of forgetting even that they've made some of the records that they've made. I've recently, during my holiday over the Christmas period, had a period of time where I've kind of like gone, oh yeah, I've forgotten about those Tori Amos albums, which are on that shelf up there, where my finger is right now pointing, and thinking, oh, I really need to listen to those more often, because sometimes I just haven't been in the mood. And although mood is the thing for lovers and cattle, according to June, mood is really, really important. And when you're listening to music, you have to go, that's the song that I want to hear now. That's the bit that fits with me. Like very recently, I had a bit of the song Health and Efficiency by Cinerama in my head, and I was going, where do I know this song? And it's just like a tiny little bit about the bit where you're trying to imagine what life would be like when you were 30. Just that little couplet there. And then all of a sudden go, I need to listen to that. So I have been, and one of the good things about doing these Notcasts actually is being able to go back through the bands that I haven't heard very much of over the years, going back and listening to them again, rediscovering the songs that have been released. And I listened to James's album, The Great Western, on the 10th of December 2022. Or it might have actually been the 9th, on a Friday, coming back on the train from Cardiff into London Paddington. The journey upon which much of this album was actually written is that James would be commuting between the Manic studio in Cardiff and his home in London, often get the train and sit and write lyrics or play out little bits of music on his journey. So it felt appropriate. So The Great Western, the first solo album of 3 so far released by James during the course of his career. Alongside obviously the about 15 solo album, or the 15 albums released by the band themselves. It was opened with the single That's No Way to Tell a Lie. And one of the things about That's No Way to Tell a Lie, by the way, is that it was engineered by Guy Massey. Guy Massey being the second guitarist who joined the Manics for live shows in 2004 and 2005. And I remember when I saw the first one of the shows from that tour, the Lifeblood tour, and there was a guy playing guitar in the spot where Richie used to stand, and I was really affronted by that, because whilst to most people it may not have mattered, to me it did matter that the Manics had an extra guitarist. Now I couldn't give a shit, but in 2004, they were a band that I'd grown up with. I first listened to them in 1990 or 1991 when they appeared on Snub TV on BBC Two. The first song of theirs I heard was Motown Junk. The first configuration of the band was a 4-piece. And then to suddenly replace the guy who'd gone missing with another guy and not even tell anyone, it's kind of important, But then that's a reflection of who I was then as a 30-year-old, not a reflection of who I am now as a considerably older than 30-year-old. That's No Way to Tell a Lie, the first solo single by James, by the way. I think it's really, really good. In fact, the whole of the album, The Great Western, is really strong. Aside from the fact that Sean Moore doesn't appear on it, to me, I regard it as being, a Manics adjacent album. It's not like the solo albums by, let's say, Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, where he's trying to fulfill as part of the musical remit that he likes, that could in no way be covered by the original band. This is the only substantial difference, actually, is that James is writing the lyrics for these songs. You could listen to some of the songs on this album. On Saturday Morning, We Will Rule the World, for example, Still a Long Way to Go, That's No Way to Tell a Lie, An English Gentleman. You could listen to those songs. You could go, they sound like Manic songs. In fact, Still a Long Way to Go, were I doing a covers album, that would probably be on my covers album. Although I do know, and as I've mentioned this before in both the Metallica and David Bowie episodes, a covers album is the last gasp of the creatively bankrupt or the contractually pushed. But I think it was a very good, strong album. And if you're kind of thinking, I'd like an album that really sounds like the Manics, and I've listened to all the Manics albums to death, get this. Sadly, long out of print, I think. You could probably pick up CDs relatively affordably. Vinyl, of course, would be about the size of a mortgage payment because nobody was buying it. And it takes its title, The Great Western, from the name of the railway that runs between Cardiff and London, the Great Western Railway, which I've been on many, many, many times. As I've mentioned before, I did have a partner who lived in Cardiff. I commuted a lot between the two towns over several years. I'm very familiar with the city, and I always felt that, at one point I was told I was honorary Welsh, which I don't think is strictly true. But when you look at, for example, the booklet that comes inside the album, it very clearly kind of defines the album's geography. It's got so Caffin Hill there, I think Spiller's Records, which is the oldest record shop in the world, and a fine record shop, although I prefer its original location to where it is now. There's the Cardiff railway station there, the Great Western Railway, and then Bad Boys and Painkillers, The Wrong Beginning. They kind of have, if you take the train journey, you can kind of see some of these things that are here. And then obviously the other elements, they've got a couple of tracks that are themed about actually religion. So Say Hello to the Pope and That's No Way to Tell a Lie. And That's No Way to Tell a Lie, by the way, the lyric around that is a song around how humans have perverted the glory or the supposed kind of glory and purity of religious belief and a deity and turned it into a way of engineering mind control over certain people. This is not to sound too melodramatic about it. That's, I think, the message that I took out from the lyrics. Other people could have taken out very, very different messages indeed. And so on this album, what we had is, I think Nicky Wire did lyrics on at least one song, possibly more. Track 3, a poet called John Niven did lyrics to 2 songs. James played near enough everything apart from drums, and then there was additional keyboards by David Ringer and Nick Naismith, both of whom have been recording and performing with the Manics over the years. So if you kind of just think about the Great Western, it's a very underrated record. I think it's got a lot of really good songs on it, but it did have, of course, 2 singles. The first one, as I've mentioned before, being That's No Way to Tell a Lie. And at this point in the band's career, if you ordered stuff, you would get 7 inches and you would get special postcards and all that type of stuff. So of course I ordered the singles because I'm a sad record collector spod. Would I ever change? Probably not, come to think of it. Besides which, it's too late now, isn't it? And the second single from the album was An English Gentleman, which takes which has its lyric kind of very clearly inspired by meeting the band's former publicist Philip Hall, who died, I think, of cancer in 1993 or thereabouts. An English Gentleman got a number of 7-inch releases, by the way. I have 3 7-inches of An English Gentleman, primarily because there was a pressing fault with it. So the first 7-inch came with, I think, an art card, and was due to come on red vinyl, but due to a mistake, some copies came on black vinyl. So I got sent a second copy of the first 7-inch on the red vinyl, as contractually promised and agreed. And when I ordered the 3 formats at the same time, I got by that I mean the 2 7-inches and the CD single. I originally ordered the red vinyl 7-inch, which is there, and then the second 7-inch was signed by James, and also features an extra track on the B-side, Silver Birch Bonfire Blues, and this one features on the 7-inch, Victory and Defeat on the Kendon Hill. And I think the Kendon Hill, and correct me if I'm wrong, because Kendon Hill, I think, was a hill that was used for training by boxers and things like that. So it was about, playing out your imaginary victories and defeats there. But no, I think it's a really strong album. So yes, it also has a number of fantastic B-sides on the various editions of the various formats. That's No Way to Tell a Lie, by the way, there's a great track called I think it's called Don't Look Back. It's on one of the 7-inches, and I can't remember which one it's on. Is it on one of the 7-inches? No, it isn't. It's on one of the other B-sides. Oops, forgive me. But That's No Way to Tell a Lie has Kodachrome Ghosts and I Never Wanted Sunshine on the CD single. I Never Wanted Sunshine is pretty good, and a track called Lost Again that's on the 7-inch. An English Gentleman has Victory and Defeat on the Kendon Hill and Silver Birch Bonfire Blues on the 7-inch versions, and it also has on this Days Slip Away and Summer Wind. And I think there was a second single. Hang on. Yes, I was wrong. I misfiled it. Here's the second CD of That's No Way to Tell a Lie, which has Don't Look Back on it. And I think Don't Look Back is one of the best B-sides from any of the Manics related releases that there has been. But it didn't fit on the shelf. So that's why it didn't put there. There was also a second, and surprisingly, a second solo album released in 2006. And that was the album by Nicky Wire, and the first single was Break My Heart Slowly, which had a 7-inch release here in a die-cut sleeve. Is it any good? No, not particularly. It's very clearly Nicky is not the best singer in the world, I'll put it that way, and that shows in the material. But full credit to him for going full pelt and trying to make it work. There was also a CD single, which was backed with a fantastic B-side called Derek Jarman's Garden. Derek Jarman's Garden, the actual garden, which was tended by the filmmaker Derek Jarman, is at Dungeness, which is the only desert conditions in the UK, and it's probably one of my favourite places. I was going to say if I could live anywhere in the UK, it would be Dungeness, but that is not strictly true, because Dungeness is right next to the sea. It's very low, and it'll probably flood at some point very frequently. There was, of course, also the album by Nicky Wire here, which was called I Killed the Zeitgeist, and that was promoted by a download single, an early mix of I Killed the Zeitgeist, and then a CD which came out on the 25th of September 2006, and is a very ramshackle self-created thing. So pretty much everything on the album was by Nicky, apart from drums were by Greg Haver, who also plays on the James Dean Bradfield album. Keyboards are by Nick Naismith, and extra guitar and backing vocals on Kimono Rock and Withdrawal Retreat are by some guy called James Dean Bradfield, who I've never heard of, and I have no idea what he does. Again, this sounds like a bunch of fantastic Manic's B-sides, and I'm pretty convinced that some of the tracks that were on Send Away the Tigers B-sides were actually just leftover songs from the Nicky Wire period that the band just went, okay, we'll put it out. So there was a blurring of lines between what was a Manic's track and what was a Nicky Wire track, and I think we had a little bit of that with some of the DVD singles with tracks like In My Time of Quarantine and stuff like that as well. But it was... yeah, so again, not issued on vinyl, not very many live shows in support of that, and I didn't see any of the Nicky Wire live shows anyway, so there we go. It moved on. The 8th Manic solo album was announced in March 2007 with the release of a free download and a limited to 1,000 copies 7-inch single, Underdogs, one-sided, and a song that now has been somewhat kind of written out of the band's history. It hasn't been played live for a very long time. It got a commercial release as a one-sided 7-inch, and it has a sticker that has that lovely, cheerful message about prostitutes go to heaven, it's their clients that go to hell. And this is a song, Underdogs, which I think was trying to pin its colours to the mast and to say, you know, we're still the Manics that you fell in love with all those years ago, even though we've sold lots of records and we've headlined stadiums, and we just made a terrible record called Lifeblood. About this one's for the freaks, the beautiful, and and for all the devotees, written in your soul. Yeah, so it's a strange thing. If you're a band and you've been going for 20 years and you've sold millions of records and you've headlined stadiums and you've made an enormous amount of money, whether you've got it all still is another matter, but when you're financially secure to go, yeah, we're Underdogs. And not to get too controversial, it also reminds me of a little bit of Donald Trump's administration, in so much as they always thought that somehow they were the agitators and the usurpers, the people that were going to make the difference and to make it happen, and that they were... Dude, you're fucking president, okay? You're not an underdog here. You're literally the most powerful guy leading the biggest country in the goddamn world. You aren't a weird, unusual, unseen, unloved, unknown, powerless kind of nobody here. You're literally like fucking president. And the same thing is when you're signed to a major label and you're got a kind of career where you're able to sustain a life in the music industry, which isn't particularly common. You know, you're not an underdog at all, especially not when you've got, surprises me actually sometimes when I think about Morrissey saying that he's being suppressed, when it's like, dude, no, you're just like, an old dude that used to sell a lot of records, probably in the same position as Van Morrison was 30 years ago, moaning about not getting into the charts and stuff, when really, your time has been and gone. And so that's probably, for those of you that wonder, is Mark going to do a thing about the Smiths? Yeah, I am. And I'm probably going to fall out with some people as a result, because I'm going to say some stuff about Morrissey that people aren't going to like. But the idea of putting your colours to the mast and going, hey, our fans are the Underdogs, it's like, dude, like, you headline Reading and Glastonbury and V Festival and a football stadium, and you had #1 singles. You aren't Underdogs, okay? You're not. If you ever were, you've been co-opted into the mainstream. So Underdogs, by the way, does not appear in its studio form on the 10th anniversary edition of Send Away the Tigers, and I don't quite know why. Maybe the band are a little bit embarrassed by it. I'm certainly not, but then again, I'm not in the band, am I? But I don't like the way of McClunkying the old stuff. It's changing the configurations or the running orders that you've got on the albums. Do what Brett Anderson did, put it in your sleeve notes and go, if I had my way now, this is what the album would look like. Don't pretend that Lost was on Maladjusted, and don't pretend that Welcome to the Dead Zone was always the second track on Send Away the Tigers. It wasn't. And by the way, they sold more than enough copies of Send Away the Tigers to be able to prove that it wasn't. So Send Away the Tigers was also kind of preceded by an album sampler. Here's a 4-track album sampler on a watermarked CDR. This features Your Love Alone Is Not Enough, The Second Great Depression, and the next 2 singles from the album, Autumnsong and Indian Summer. And it was preceded by a more commercial single. This one got to number 2 in the charts. It came out on a 7-inch, backed with a Fearless Punk Ballad, which I think was sung by Nicky. It also appeared on 2 CD singles, which are here. One features Boxes and Lists on the B-side, and the other one features Love Letters to the Future, Welcome to the Dead Zone, and a track called Little Girl Lost. And these were, if you bought them online, 3 for £5, or if you bought them from HMV. I had a HMV in my town at the time, so you were able to get them relatively affordably. And then later in 2017, to match the 10th anniversary of the release of it, there came a Record Store Day 12-inch of Your Love Alone Is Not Enough, which was backed with 3 different demos, one by James, one by Nicky, and one by the band doing a 60s kind of jangle Motown sound. And what I've got to say is Your Love Alone Is Not Enough. It's a fantastic song. It's perhaps not what you would necessarily expect to get from the Manic Street Preachers. It's a very straight, very direct, very straightforward song, which has very little in the way of hidden depths within it. And that, by the way, is not necessarily a criticism. It absolutely isn't. Sometimes straight and direct and shot to the heart is exactly what you wanted. There's a number of acoustic versions of the track, one sung just by James, one sung by Nina from the Cardigans, who was the second vocalist on the studio release of Your Love Alone Is Not Enough. And it takes its title from the last line of a suicide note, Your Love Alone Is Not Enough. And it's a very interesting kind of concept to take that from, because it's not been specified who that is. But if you have or have had suicidal thoughts and ideation, and I have, the idea of being inside a stable, loving relationship isn't necessarily the panacea or the medicine that is going to make everything else okay. Sometimes your love alone is not enough. And if you lose everything else that goes around your life, you sometimes kind of think, well, actually, I'm in a very vulnerable position because there's only one thing now, which I myself kind of would feel perhaps would give my life a degree of meaning. And there are other elements that come to it. And then we get into the discussion of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and everything gets very therapist speak very, very quickly. Your Love Alone Is Not Enough got to number 2. And I think the album did very, very well as well. I think it got to number 2 in the charts. There are parts of the album, Send Away the Tigers, that feel a little bit workmanlike. It feels a little bit like the Manics have approached the album with the view of finding joy again in making a racket in a room. But there is an element of, and lots of bands will say this, is, it's our best album since the album that all the critics loved. I don't think the Manics ever quite got to that stage. But there is an element of going back to where you were and kind of thinking, well, okay, so we went down one particular avenue. We got a little bit lost on the way. We're going to go and do something a little bit different. We're going to take a slightly different direction. And so, for example, U2 did this with pop, and then they moved back into the All That You Can't Leave Behind album, kind of going, yeah, we did an experiment and it didn't work. We're going to try and go back to the formula, go back to the well. AC/DC never deviated from the formula. So every AC/DC album just sounds like more songs written by AC/DC. Depeche Mode now haven't had any musical progression for probably 17, 18 years. Not since Precious, I think, was probably the last time they really did anything that was new in their sound. Everything just feels like it's refinements of the same template. This is the album where the Manics kind of go back to those guys in a room making a racket kind of approach that you had for Generation Terrorists, Gold Against the Soul. But they're older, they're wiser, they're clever swine now. It's not quite so good. There's an element of diminishing returns about it. Sometimes it feels a little bit like there's not a huge amount of joy in the album, and there's not a huge amount of anything. When I listen to it, I go, compelled. And compulsion is a really big thing in art, because if the artist doesn't portray or communicate a sense of compulsion, a sense of I have to say this or my head will explode in the song. You kind of go, well, why as somebody am I going to have to spend my time listening to it if I don't get that sense of compulsion, that sense of necessity, that sense of I have to do this because that is the thing that drives me. If there's not the commitment from the artist, why would a listener necessarily be as committed as that? And it's an album which I think is trying to generate a sense of nostalgia. It tries to reclaim the band's legacy and history from perhaps the slight deviation away from what people remember them being. So Know Your Enemy, and certainly the somewhat diluted Lifeblood didn't sounded like the Manics trying to do something new, but the experiment not really succeeding in much the same way as Suede's A New Morning did in 2002. But the questions of who am I, what do I believe, why am I doing this, why bother, kind of come through from the album, and there's an element of trying to reshape one's identity. But when you're doing it on a public stage, there's not a point of, well, I'm going to try my hair and baby, what have you done to your hair, all that type of stuff. There's an element of going, okay, so you're not quite sure who you are in your work. There was a quote from, I think, Nicky said, it didn't feel like we were a band, we were on the verge of nothingness, and to dig that out of ourselves made us fall in love with us again. And that's an interesting kind of way of approaching it, because as an album, it felt a little bit like All That You Can't Leave Behind by U2. It felt like we're going to make a Manics album for Manics fans that feel that maybe they've lost touch with us a little bit. And it's a curious place to be, and it ended up being a record that, to me, I liked a lot of the material on it, but I didn't love the album as a whole, and I still don't. Some of the songs on it are absolutely fantastic, actually. Your Love Alone Is Not Enough is very good. The Send Away the Tigers title track is pretty good. I quite like Indian Summer and Imperial Body Bags and I'm Just a Patsy. But Autumnsong is not a good track by any stretch of the imagination at all. It's also got a little bit of sloppy work in it, actually. The version of Underdogs that's on the original LP is a sloppy bit of Pro Tools editing. It's got a bad vocal edit. It cuts off in the middle of a cymbal crash. It cuts off in the middle of a line. It's cut and pasted various parts of it. It's pretty shonky as a finished mix, and I kind of get the feeling that actually the reason that Underdogs might not be on the LP is because the finished mix of the track isn't satisfactory. They should have really gone back and remixed it and stuck it on the album and kept it on the fucking album, as opposed to futzing it later on. We also had, as the third track from the LP, is Your Love Alone Is Not Enough. Fourth is Indian Summer, the second single, I think, from the album. Actually, no, it's the third single. And Indian Summer is not a great track. It was the second single that was released from the LP. I think I'll have to check the catalogue numbers. I could be wrong there. In fact, I am wrong. Autumnsong was the second track from the LP that was released as a single officially. So there we go. Yeah, so Autumnsong was the second single, and it was released, and it came in at number 10 in the pop charts. If you ordered it from the band's website, you got, I think, the 7-inch and 2 CD singles, and you got some signed postcards. The 7-inch was backed with a track called The Vorticists, which is largely instrumental, and again appears on the deluxe edition of the LP. And there was 2 CD singles, again backed with Red Sleeping Beauty of this version, which I think was a cover version, actually. Let me just quickly check, and I can't tell. And then a 4-track CD single, which was backed with The Long Goodbye, Morning Comrades, and 1404. 1404 being the year of an attempted overthrow of British, or more correctly, English influence in Wales way back when. It didn't quite work, and obviously Wales is now part of the United Kingdom and still is. But it's only a matter of time, really, I think, before there's a independence vote in Scotland and in Wales as well. And if you bought the track from the band's website, You were sent 4 postcards and a free rubber band, one of which was signed, featuring photographs from the period. So Your Love Alone, the Autumnsong cover, the Send Away the Tigers cover, and the cover to Indian Summer, each of which was backed with a quote, because the band were very keen, and still are, of course, on putting quotes on their singles when they do release singles. But the interesting thing about the sleeve art, by the way, is all this sleeve art is taken from, I think it's Valerie Phillips, I think it is, and a book about fast forward and future and all that type of stuff. But they're all the imagery around about this period is kind of subverting concepts of and ideas of standard capitalism, people standing in front of flags, co-opting symbols of authority and subverting them by showing human nature next to those type of things. Have I turned into Stu's Corner off Melody Maker? Who knows? Does anyone even remember that far back? No idea. The final single from the album was Indian Summer, which was released in autumn 2007. Again, 2 CDs, backed with Anorexic Rodin and Heyday of the Blood, Foggy Eyes and Lady Lazarus on the various CDs. And there was a 7-inch, which again, if you bought from the band's website, you got some free gubbins that came with it. This was backed with an instrumental called You Know It's Going to Hurt. And you also got a huge poster, which is here and was signed by the band, which features the lyrics to Autumnsong, which if you ever wanted the lyrics to one of the Manic's worst singles in absolutely huge letters on your walls, then you could be very, very happy indeed. I'm not going to lie, Autumnsong, or so more correctly, Indian Summer, is not a great track. Autumnsong is equally not a great track at all. In fact, I think the lyric to Autumnsong is really meaningless. There's a line about, baby, what have you done to your hair? And I just kind of go, really? That's what you're saying in the lyric? Whereas Indian Summer is a total rip-off of A Design for Life. You think about the guitar arpeggio that you've got in Indian Summer, and you could do a medley with that and Design for Life, and you wouldn't even know where one ended and the other one began. So not really a vastly inspired album in some respects. As I said, it felt like the Manics were trying to recapture something which they thought they'd lost, and by trying to do it, they'd actually kind of started to show that they had started to lose it, because they're almost like they didn't have the courage of their convictions in the work that they've been doing previously. We go over to track 5, the Second Great Depression, which is on this 10th anniversary edition of the LP, which, by the way, I will get to. And the Second Great Depression is a bit dry. It's a bit sterile, and it sounds a little bit overproduced. It sounds like someone's tried to squeeze the juice out of the song, and it just becomes a little bit too tight. It ends up sounding a little bit stillborn. We do have Rendition as well, which is track 6, and that's got a clunky lyric. It's quite simplistic. It feels a little bit like a song that's designed by committee, is that people have written individual parts of songs and then they've tried to put them together to make them work. Or someone said, I need to write a banger, let's go and write a banger, and you end up with something that feels a little bit insincere, a little bit like someone's going, we need a song like Design for Life but not quite as good. I've got a riff, guys, we'll call it Indian Summer, because an Indian Summer means a second period beyond which you've naturally extended the summer. So an Indian Summer being actually, September, October, a brief burst of sunshine after summer should have ended, and then it just feels a little bit cynical. So then we also have a number of songs just as we come to the end of the LP. I'm Just a Patsy is one of the best, easily. It takes a quote from a statement by Leaf Hart of the Oswald, who officially shot JFK and said, I'm just a patsy. The idea being is that, you're somebody that's placed up there as a human sacrifice that didn't actually do the thing, but you're made to carry the can for it, like a human voodoo doll. And there was a lot of stuff on the album about imperialism, power, war, the dynamic between those power relationships between the people and authority. The cover photographs that you had is kind of like people subverting the there you go, people dressed in what is clearly Friday night clothing, but what is clearly a foggy Tuesday morning, for example. It's about the relationship between people and power and authority, and the way that money will define and control parts of your life in ways that it probably shouldn't do. That's also mentioned in Imperial Body Bags, which has a lyric which is very clearly around the idea of the Iraq War, the idea that people were dying in other countries so someone could get some cheaper fuel, for example, and the concepts that go with that. And also, by the way, the track Working Class Hero, a hidden track on the CD, which is more officially kind of laid out as one of the tracks on the reissue LP, as well as the final track, which is Winter Lovers, which is the final original on the original release of the album. I should say, by the way, whilst this album is perceived as a return to form, I don't really regard it as such. I feel it's a little bit cynical, and it's an album that's made out of really good moments, but not necessarily hanging particularly well as an LP. It does take its name from a very important statement by who was once the biggest comedian in the UK, Tony Hancock, who was born in Birmingham, by the way, which is where I grew up. He used the phrase "send away the tigers" as kind of like battling one inner demons by getting drunk. As you drink and you send away the tigers. But there's also a second layer of imagery around sending away the tigers, which is you think about, especially in war zones and post 9/11, 2003, 2004, for example, when there was the war in Iraq, and I think that the zoo in Iraq was bombed, and you had wild tigers that died because they couldn't escape or because they couldn't eat, for example, or the imagery that's in the 12 Monkeys film around the tigers walking the streets of the city because the zoo had been bombed and the tigers had escaped. It's about trying to impose a sense of order, about battling demons and depression and all those things. And so the lyric about the second Great Depression there, it works on a financial level, but it's also probably harking back to or making an echo of an inner battle with one's demons. The second Great Depression is, if you've got depression, you don't necessarily, it doesn't announce itself, it doesn't knock on the door and go, "Hi guys, I'm depression. You're going to be miserable. You're not going to feel pleasure at certain things anymore. You're going to adopt some probably quite damaging coping mechanisms, and you're going to get yourself and your life into quite a precarious situation as a result." The second Great Depression would be almost like, the element in Poltergeist 2 where the girl goes, "They're back." You kind of go, "Well, I thought I defeated them once, but here they are again. Here are the tigers. A second time, I am fighting them again." And sat there like, Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Star Wars movie going, "We're smarter than this. How did we get caught again with depression? Bloody hell." Somebody shoot me with SSRIs, for example. It's a powerful bit of imagery, but very little of the LP actually communicates that degree of thought. It's also worth remembering, as I said, that the last line from A Suicide Note that gave its words to the title of Your Love Alone Is Not Enough. It's also worth remembering that Tony Hancock committed suicide, and in his suicide note he wrote the words, "Things have gone wrong too many times." And if you've ever had a slightly kind of turbulent life, you will definitely have felt that at some point in your life. Is no matter all the efforts and the power that you put in and all the work you put in to try and conquer the demons, is that battle is a war of attrition with an invisible monster that doesn't declare itself and can't easily be kind of navigated its way through. You just have to keep going and hope that somehow you can defeat it. There are things that you can change about the external elements of it, but there are elements around the internal part of it which are going to be very, very difficult to defeat and destroy. And that's a very powerful thing. So Send Away the Tigers is almost an album that's a concept record, almost like a sequel to This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours, which is also an album which talks very kind of openly and adroitly about depression. Is Send Away the Tigers is almost like catching in 10 years later with the same bands, going, what has happened since then and where have they been? And whilst they may have conquered stadiums and finances and all that type of thing, there are certain things that you will not necessarily be able to defeat easily or quickly. So Send Away the Tigers, not a bad LP, not an amazing LP. I regard it pretty much as a middle of the pack kind of Manic's LP, better than a lot of stuff that's to come, not as good as a lot of stuff that's already been. And there you are. The last two releases from this time don't really have a physical presence. One is The Ghost of Christmas Past. It was the band's Christmas single in 2007 that was released as a free download from their website. And I got to tell you, it's one of the best Christmas songs ever written. Really captures the joy and the sense of celebration that would happen when you were a child and you were kind of struggling with, the only thing I've got to look forward to is to Christmas. I might get a Sky Electric. I might get a bike. I might get, who knows what I'll get, but I'll get something. And you kind of like the big Christmas thing. It's a highlight of your year. Because Christmas Day is opening the present and finding out what you've got. The last release from the period was a download single, but also actually on the NME Awards 2008 CD, cover mounted with the NME when you could still buy it as a physical newspaper. It was a cover version of Rihanna's Umbrella, which the band played live. They released a remix of it and an acoustic version as download tracks. And they played it when they did the NME Big Gig Awards in 2008, where I think they got the Lifetime Godlike Genius Award or something. I don't quite know what they won because I don't really care about what awards bands win. I was reminded of what William Burroughs said when he was awarded something in 1984. He said, I didn't listen to the critics when they wanted to lock me up, and I'm not listening to the critics now. I don't really pay the blindest bit of attention to that. As far as I was concerned, the Manic's Godlike Genius was a while before that, and it started to drift away around about now, because you end up going, what? How many things have you got to say? How many times have you got to say them? And then when does it just become repetition of the same thing? And of course, repetition is the point where it starts to obliterate all meaning. We got lots and lots of live shows around about this period. There were a number of high-profile gigs, Glastonbury, Rock Palast, festival, all over the place, too many festivals. But the band were not headlining the festivals anymore. They were playing mid-late afternoon, early evening. They were like third on the bill. So there's definitely that perception of, in one way, there's a degree of success because the band are still playing, they're still performing, they're still making a living out of it. But there's also, from a perception point of view, they're not festival headliners anymore. They've been around a bit too long. New bands come up, and so you go, right, so that is the band's profile now, is bands that were better years before, and set lists have started to become quite staid. They become quite predictable. The band were playing 4 or 5 songs off the new album, but the same 14 or 15 old songs from the first decade of their career. They weren't playing anything off Lifeblood. They were barely playing anything off Know Your Enemy. They were playing 3 or 4 songs each off Generation Terrorist, Gold Against the Soul, maybe a couple off Holy Bible, 3, 4 of Everything Must Go, and This Is My Truth. The shows had become less about the band playing their new material live and more about providing a jukebox for the people that were watching them, that remembered how good they were 10 years ago. And this is kind of seen on the Glastonbury show, which is included on the DVD, which is on the 10th anniversary version of the album, which came out in 2017. The set list is, it takes 5 songs until you get something that's less than a decade old, which is... Then they play Your Love Alone Is Not Enough. You get Autumnsong. You get one song that isn't a single in the Glastonbury set, which is Imperial Body Bags. It takes you until track 12 to get to that, and I think there's only 3 songs off the LP, off the album, Send Away the Tigers. And a 14-song set, so there's 11 songs are all hits, and they're all over, 8 or 9 years old at this point. So you've got You Love Us, Motorcycle Emptiness, You Stole the Sun From My Heart, Faster, Everything Must Go, From Despair to Where, Ocean Spray, If You Tolerate This, Your Children Will Be Next, La Tristessa Durera, Motown Junk, and A Design for Life. The Manics had started to become a touring museum of how good they used to be. Luckily, the DVD that's on this has a number of videos. It has a number of rehearsals from Cardiff just in advance of the tour, 5 songs from that, and several songs from the practice sessions as well. So we've got a good array of alternative visual material. You also get the album in its reconfigured form without Underdogs, but with Welcome to the Dead Zone. You get the whole of the album on the back half of CD1 in demo form. and then you get 19 B-sides, all of the ones which I've mentioned previously. And this, by the way, is a pretty good deluxe edition version of the album. It's not amazing, primarily because I think that there's some extra stuff which I'd like to see on there. I'd like to see some of the other TV shows and TV appearances that there are. But as far as a 3-disc reissue version of the album goes, it's very, very serviceable. There's certainly an eye on putting a lot of material out there. You get 40 studio audio tracks. You get a live show, which is 14 songs. You get probably about another 10. So you've got something like 65 individual songs across 3 discs, which is, I think, a very good representation of what's in there. But it's, again, the album itself is, in my opinion, by no means the best of the Manic LPs. It's the first one where there's a sense that the band have started to move ever so slightly backwards as opposed to going forwards in their evolution, and a sense that the band are not necessarily 100% confident of what their next steps would be. They've made a conscious decision to try and be a certain type of band as opposed to be the best band that they can be. And it sounds quite critical when I put it like that, but it's not really. It's more that, Send Away the Tigers feels to me like the band's all that you can't leave behind. The LP where they are, they're trying to recapture something which some people could debate that they haven't actually lost. There's a sense of going back to and trying old things again to see if you can learn new tricks with old dogs as opposed to trying new tricks. And it's a fascinating LP, but not by any stretch of the imagination my favourite Manic's one. That is Sent Away the Tigers, Manic Street Preachers' 8th studio album, released May 2007, which means it's 16 years old this year, which I can't really believe, because to me it feels like that's quite recent, actually, which, bearing in mind, I think the band are on something like their 15th LP now, means that actually they've kept up their prolific activity all the way through without having long gaps between albums. I think the biggest gap they ever had between an album was 2001 to 2004's Lifeblood, which was 3.5 years. But aside from that, they've consistently been releasing stuff every couple of years all the way through. I'm going to wrap up here. It sounds like I've been giving this LP a damn good kicking, and that's not how I'm quite charitable about it. It's quite a good LP. But when you're a band that have made life-changing, when you're a band that has changed the way people think about the world, releasing quite a good LP isn't quite good enough. I know that not every time that you throw the dart, not every time you're going to hit the bullseye, but this one really felt like trying to capture something which didn't need to be recaptured, because all it really does is it highlights the distance that you've travelled between what you used to be and what you now are. It's the first backwards look, I think, by the Manics in terms of a definitive kind of studio LP. And as you know, I'm boldly going forward because I can't find reverse. I've never really been vastly interested in nostalgia, despite what the contents of my record collection may tell you. I'm always really, really interested in bands talking about now and here and what it is to be this age in 2023 and experiencing life now. I've never been vastly interested in bands trying to recapture something that they perceive to have lost, or to play old albums in full. I mean, they're good shows, but to me, I'm much more interested in now, because we only get one chance to be alive now, to be this age, in this world, at this time, and to spend that time looking back isn't, in my opinion, particularly healthy, which is, obviously you've got to know where you've come from in order to know where you are, but at the same point, if all you do is look back, all you see is more and more junk. And that's where I'm going to stop. So if you made it to the end of this, thank you. And I applaud your patience. I'm going to go off and have some dinner now, and I will see you sometime soon. Okay, bye.